Hello, everybody. Hi. Hi, thanks for joining. I see you rolling in. Welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. It's so good to have you all here. Today, we're doing something a little bit special. So as usual, I'm your host, Colin Campbell, the Director of Marketing at Sales Hacker. You already know what you signed up for, but just a quick reminder, we're talking about some super tactical fundamental stuff that can actually make a really, really big impact in your pipeline. The truth is, if you're not nailing the fundamentals, no matter how much sales enablement content and tools you throw at your sales process, you're not really going to get that much better. If you have solid fundamentals, just a little bit of investment in those things makes a big, big difference. So we're here to nail the fundamentals today. We're going to talk about intros, like how do you start talking to prospects so that they don't, I'm not interested, click, or just walk away. We're going to talk about leaving voicemails so that you actually get people to call you back. They're more likely to set a meeting. They're more likely to close. Every call you get is one you don't have to make. And really, we're going to talk about like specific things you can do and say to make a real connection with prospects, because we all know you only have a few minutes at a time per person. It can be hard to do that, but there are ways to do it. We're going to get into the specifics on all that today. So to help us with that, I'm joined by John Healy. John is the VP of Sales at Factor 8. So first of all, John, thank you so much for making the time to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. So here's what we're doing today that's different, everybody. We managed to, Factor 8 was gracious enough to really give us some of their sales training for free. If you don't know Factor 8, they're a fantastic sales training and consulting firm. They train reps and managers and leadership. They do consulting on process. The trainings are really, really good. I've been through some of them. I loved them. You're not getting everything for free today, but we scraped out like the really actionable nuggets so that by the end of today, 12 p.m. PT, you can say and do things differently that will have an impact on your work. So we're going to run this like a workshop because it is a training and it is a workshop. So there are two ways that you can interact with John and I. One is the normal way. Down in the QA box, right down there, you can ask questions. You can upvote other people's questions. If you see a question that was already asked and you want it to be answered, upvote it, bubble it up to the top. We're going to get to as many as possible. We're also going to try something new today. So if you see the little raise hand button down there, go ahead and give it a test drive if you want. You can raise your hand. We'll see it. So, oh, yeah, I see you guys. 10 of you, 19. We're going to get some participation. All right, cool. So there are a couple places through the training where it'll make sense for you to talk to us. And you may have questions. You may be able to answer a question that John asks. You may even be able to do a little role play. So when John tells you, you can raise your hand. I'll call on you. I'll let you talk. For now, go ahead and lower your hands. And if you got a question, and if you don't have a microphone, that's okay. I'll pay just as much attention to the Q&A box, okay? So if you have a question you want to put in there, do that. All right, so there's two ways to talk to us. Q&A, raise your hand. Ready, everybody? No more delays. Here we go. John, take us home.
All right, perfect. Let me go ahead and share my screen here so that you guys can see everything that's going on. Colin, can you give me the thumbs up that we're good to go here? All right, perfect. Hey, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning if you're out on the West Coast. As Colin mentioned, what we're going to be doing today is really some fundamental blocking and tackling type skills. So this is something if we were doing a workshop with reps, this would typically be about a day's worth of content that we'd be going through, because there'd be a lot of the role playing and the digging into it and getting into the specifics and going out and actually practicing it, right? But our goal today is to really give everybody on this call, whether you're a frontline contributor or whether you're managing reps, some tactical things that Colin mentioned, right, that you can go out and do immediately following this, right? These aren't super complicated. This isn't high-level theory that we're talking about. This is tactical execution. And the goal and kind of my approach in all of these types of skills is really to focus on the things that you're doing 60, 70, 80 times a day and getting incrementally better at those things, right? This isn't silver bullet stuff where all of a sudden you're overnight going to double your sales, right? This is, if I can get 10% better at the things I do 60 or 70 times a day, but do them consistently 5 days a week, 4 weeks a month, 12 months a year, when that year's over, I've got a hell of a lot more results than I would have had otherwise, right? That's the approach that we take. That's what we're trying to get into. So I'm going to jump right in. We've also got something in here. You'll hear some audio come on at a couple of different points. So we've actually got some actual customer calls that we've captured during the course of our trainings. We've obviously redacted the company names and phone numbers and things like that, but you'll actually be able to hear some of these things live, and some of them may hit a little too close to home. For some of you leaders out there who may have heard this a little too often as you're listening to calls from your teams and doing your call coaching sessions. So let's get this thing jumping. Colin, I'm getting the same delay I was getting just a second ago.
While that's loading, I also forgot to mention something. So everybody, if you're taking notes, that's great. Factor 8's also going to send over some like checklists, prep sheets, cheat sheets, stuff like that. So on the topics we're covering today, so you can print them out, keep them on your desktop, whatever. So if you want to take notes, that's great, but keep an eye out for stuff from Factor 8 that'll help with this later on too.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Colin. When we get to the end, assuming we get through all of the stuff that we meant to get through, right? You'll see I'll have a note at the top of where you can get the content and where you can get some of these cheat sheets, and I'll highlight them as we go through as well. So first, just kind of getting us started here on why this is so important and why it's so important for our reps to make sure that they're getting these at bats and getting their customers engaged, prospects engaged. This is from an old corporate executive board study, right? But 53% of customer loyalty is dependent on their experience with the sales rep, right? So this is regardless of all the marketing you're doing, of all the product studies, the quality of your product, all those sorts of things. At the end of the day, more than half of it is still reliant on that experience with the sales rep. And that's why these skills are so critical and why it's so important that we're sharpening our rep skills and making sure that we're able to deliver against this. The three skills that Colin mentioned that we're going to be going through today: introductions that work, voicemails that are going to help you get returned, and how to engage your customers more effectively. These are what we call our first base skills, right? We're not trying to hit home runs here. We're trying to get ourselves more at bats. We're trying to get in front of more customers and make sure, again, that we can execute against these basic skills. Because if we can't execute the basics, we're never going to get into the complex negotiations and working through the decision makers and all that stuff if we're not getting in front of enough customers. That's what we're here for as well. The other reason we kind of chose to focus on these skills and why they are so important is, especially as we go through and talk about intros and voicemails, for me, those are the two where there's no excuse to not be prepared for, right? Because you don't need a customer to practice that, right? Some things when it comes to objection handling and dealing with brush offs and asking open-ended questions and active listening, you need customer calls and you need live fire to get better at those. But for intros and voicemails, you can practice your intro 100 times on your drive home tonight and get it down really well, because you don't need anyone to respond for you to feel more comfortable dialing that in and getting yourself comfortable with the verbiage. So another good reason to get into this, because this is stuff you can practice on your own and really get comfortable with. So let's talk about first kind of what are some of the key mistakes that people make when they're dealing with their introductions, right? So these are the 6 most common introduction mistakes that we see as we work with reps around the world. Some of these are going to sound very familiar to you. Some of you, these should ring some bells, right? The show up and throw up, and giving your value prop is the introduction, right? One of my biggest pet peeves, and Lauren as well, who's the founder of our company, is the calling to touch base, right? And or any of those. I don't want to call to touch base. I don't want to call to check in. Those are really, really nails on a chalkboard for me. And so we've put together here, there's this little montage. I won't play the whole thing, but these are actual customer calls that we've clipped together of all the different people calling to touch base with their customers. So give it a listen and see if this sounds familiar to anybody on the phone.
And wanted to touch base with you
I just wanted to touch base with you today. Actually, I just wanted to, I'm not sure if you have a minute. I didn't get a chance to really talk with you in detail in the account transfer. And I just wanted to kind of get some details on your company. And
right. Again, I'm not gonna continue to go down that path. I don't want to beat these poor reps up, but we've all been there, right? And it's kind of this verbal crutch that people get into when they're not sure what the reason is that they're calling, or they haven't really practiced their intro, or they don't really have it dialed in and know what it's supposed to sound like. That's when we fall into the call into touch base kind of a thing that really has no value for our customer, and it's going to make it really hard for them to want to engage with this, right? So you've got the show up and throw up. I'm not gonna dig into all of these. this is just a good excuse to show a Ron Burgundy clip because I enjoy the movie. So if you can throw it in there, right? And we're going to talk about what a good one's going to sound like and how we want to contrast that with some of these. But this is definitely the most prominent, hiccup that we run into of sales reps, right? Is we come in straight out of the gate and it's, hey, this is John calling from Factor 8, and we're an inside sales training and consulting firm that's helping customers around. And you're like, holy cow, right? I just picked up the phone, don't even know who you are, and you're already giving me a value prop, and you're already trying to pitch me on who you are. I don't care yet, right? So this is one of those things that we definitely want to make sure that we're avoiding. There's a time and a place for your value prop. You definitely want to be able to deliver it, but in the first 7 seconds of the phone call is not the time to do it, right? So when we're thinking about what a good introduction sounds like, ideally, you want to keep it under 10 seconds, right? Before that 10-second clock is up, you want to have the customer have an opportunity to engage in that call, right? That's how quick it needs to be. So again, we're trying to get that decision maker talking quickly, and we've got 3 key questions that we need to answer during the course of that introduction, right? And that is, who are you, what do you want, and why do I care, right? If we can answer those 3 questions, keep it under 10 seconds, and get the decision maker engaged quickly into the conversation, now we've got the foundation for a pretty solid introduction.
And now, John, if I remember correctly, you're going to give some examples soon.
Yes.
Before we get into that, because I think this is harder than it seems, but your examples make it feel really easy. I'm kind of wondering if anybody in the audience has an intro that they feel proud of. Anybody out there, I feel like you've got it locked in. Raise your hand if you want to share it with the group. We'd love to hear an example right now. Maybe you've nailed it before you even hear John's advice. All right, Michael Manina. I will unmute you if I can. It's not letting me unmute you, Michael.
Hello,
there
can
you go.
Hear me?
Hey, there you are.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, let's hear it, man.
Yeah, so the one I normally open up with is, hey, I understand that you work with ITSM, so I was wondering if you ever come across Freshworks before, and that gives you an opportunity to get a yes or no question in there. Have you ever come across our company before?
All right. So I noticed you work with, what was it, ITSMs?
Yeah, for calling into IT departments.
Oh, okay. Cool. Thanks for volunteering. Very brave. Appreciate it. John, what do we think?
Yeah, that's super brave. So thank you for jumping on in front of everybody and doing that, which is awesome. So I think without knowing too much about your situation, right, there are certain situations where that might work. And the situation I can think of where that would be an effective intro that I would probably want to give a try is if you've got a very strong brand in a very niche market, right? That's a good conversation where you're likely to get a yes, I heard of you. Yes, I'm familiar with you. You know you've got a strong reputation in the industry, and it gives you a chance to say, oh, how are you familiar with us? Have you worked with us in the past? Right. So in a very small industry, that could be effective, right? If you're competing in a larger universe, or maybe you're not as well known of a brand, or you're new to a market or new to an industry, I would steer clear of that, right? Because you're setting yourself up to get a no right out of the gate, right? And then you're trying to backpedal, and now you've kind of cornered yourself into having to give your value pitch or your prop, and it's so early on in the call, right? And we're now on the defensive and trying to justify who we are and what we do, and it sets kind of an adversarial tone almost to that conversation. So again, without knowing all of the specifics, I would say if you're in that niche market where you do have that very strong brand and you're hitting a very select audience, that can certainly be effective. And we'll talk about a couple of tips in just a second that I think might help you tighten that up even more and drive an even better response.
Thanks for jumping right in, Michael.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Michael's got
no fear.
Got guts, man. I tell you what. Although we didn't tell him how many people were going to be getting this at the end of the day, anyway. So maybe he didn't. Maybe it was more ignorance than bravado. I don't know. But either
just you and me, guys. Anybody else want to throw a quick example out? It's all right. I wouldn't either. Okay, cool. That was brave. I love it, Michael. you're I don't know, I need to send you like some swag or something for being awesome.
Yeah, I was going to say, give them some sort of prize. That was phenomenal. So
Yeah.
Perfect. And we'll have other opportunities to jump in, right? So if you've got other questions, or maybe after we've gone through kind of what some of those elements are that we preach, right? Then you may have some more questions and may want to bounce things off and hear how it sounds against that. So
yeah.
So again, when you're thinking about that introduction and really the mindset that you want to walk into that with is, let's understand that these people that we're reaching out to, especially when we're talking about prospecting and outbound prospecting, these folks are not sitting around with their feet up on their desk, twiddling their thumbs going, geez, I hope John calls me today because I've got a really big sales training issue and I really need to write a PO to somebody. And if only John would give me a call so I could tell him how much training I want to do for my team, right? They've got 100 things going on. They're answering emails. They've got people in their office. They're running for meetings. They're prepping for travel. They're doing a million different things. And in a lot of cases, even when they do pick up the phone, sometimes they're picking it up out of habit or on accident, right? Because they thought you were somebody else and they picked up the phone and now they realize they've walked into a sales call, right? And so yeah, like, oh crap, I didn't mean to pick it up. Thanks, that feels awesome. Let me go right into why I called, right? So your first goal really in that introduction is to get the person to pick their head up, right? You assume that they've got their head down and they're pounding away on their keyboard. They pick up the phone, they're still not listening. Your job is just to get them to go from here to here, right? Just to pick their head up, to catch enough of their attention that they want to listen to the rest of the conversation, right? And if you're looking for proof that your customers aren't listening when that conversation starts, how many of you have had those calls where you get into a really good conversation, you're 4 or 5 minutes into a call, you feel like it's going really well, then the customer kind of gives you the awkward, I'm sorry, what was your name again? Right? Because it was the first thing you said and they weren't listening when you started talking because they didn't think they had a reason to care. Now they've had a really good conversation with you and they have no idea what your name is, right? So you have to go back and do it. That's the situation we're dealing with. That's the reality of what our customers think, right? So this is not our time to start selling. This is not our time to start pitching. This is our time to grab their attention. And the best way to grab their attention is, from what we would call our swift introduction, right? Which means, so what's in it for them? We need to find some reason for this customer to care, for this customer to listen. Pardon me. And that introduction really has 4 key components. First and foremost, it's got to have their name. Everybody's favorite word in the language is their own name. So you want to make sure that they hear that right out of the gate. You want to make sure you give them your name and you want to give them your company name, right? This is not the time to show off what division you are of some large conglomerate and use a whole, like if you work at HP, say you work at HP, not I work for the enterprise storage division of Hewlett Packard, oh my gosh, right? HP, that's what you know me as, right? Then you want to get into that swift purpose statement. We'll go into a little detail about what that sounds like, right? But that's the what's in it for them piece. And then we want to end that introduction with what we would call swift, no-brainer type of a question. And I'll talk to you about what that means as well, right? Because we said a good introduction is going to be 10 seconds. It's going to give them a chance to engage quickly, right? And that's what we're going to use these swift questions for, is to get the prospect engaging quickly in the conversation. So that we can get a cadence going with our customer.
So on this slide, we actually had another brave soul send in an example in writing. So from Troy Tolino, thanks Troy, we got, I assume you use introduction. From the Swift point on, it's the goal of my call is to help fleet managers take control over their fleet tracking system and manipulate data received into useful metrics. Would that be beneficial to you?
That's really good. Yeah. So there's a few things I liked in that one right out of the bat, right? One is it was very short and to the point, right? And it was very clear what the goal of the call was, right? A lot of times people get way too fancy and overcomplicated, and it's like we're trying to trick the customer into figuring out what the goal of the call is. Right? Yeah. If you want them to know what the goal is, say the goal of my call is, the reason for my call is, right? Tee it up so they know what to listen for. And you know if you're going to get the right person, right? And it was, if I heard that correctly, it was to help fleet managers gain control over fill in the blank, right? There was something else beyond that I didn't
get some data, turn data into insights, basically.
Data into insights, right? And that first phrase was kind of to take control or to gain control over their data and all that sort of stuff. And we'll see in just a second exactly where that falls in, because that's one of those core one of those core messages that we talk about when we're building a Swift introduction. Having control, taking control, gaining control over your environment is one of those things that business people absolutely are going to value. That was really
nice. Well done, Troy.
good job, Troy. You moved to the head of the class. So that in that Swift statement, what we were just talking about with Troy's and what we'll talk about in just a second, right? That's the ear perk. That's the thing that's going to get somebody to pick their head up. If I work for a large organization that has a big fleet of trucks out there on the road and I'm buried in data and can't make heads or tails of it, and somebody starts with, the goal of my call is to help you gain control over your fleet and turn your data into action, make your data more actionable. That's going to catch my ear. That's something that's going to catch my attention if I'm hitting the right audience. And that's the only goal of your introduction, right? It's just to get them pick their head up and listen to the next thing that you're saying. So don't overcomplicate. So so Troy, you gave us a sneak peek into one of these, right? But when we talk about what business people care about, these are the core 6 values that we've found over and over across industries, across geographies, around the world, right? People value their time, they value their money. If you can help make something easier for them, make their life easier, you can help them improve their reputation within the organization or within their industry. If you can appeal to their power or their ego, right? If you can help them mitigate their risk. And the last one is what we call a lever, right? And so levers are anything you know about the account that you can use to kind of get into the door faster, right? Get the door open faster. You attended a webinar, you downloaded a white paper, we met you at a conference, Mark asked me to call you, right? We have a mutual connection somewhere. Those are all levers, right? And here's what they sound like, right? Just a couple of quick starter sentences to get you going for each of those different values, right? And you can see right there, number 5. Troy, that was almost yours word for word, right? We're going to help you get control over, boom. That's a very effective way to get people's attention.
And the point of being familiar with these levers isn't that you should try to take your product and find a way that it applies to all of these, right? Because I imagine, like a CFO, if you have a better way to use spreadsheets for a CFO, you're not going to talk about their reputation. Right. It's for saving them time, making things a little easier, maybe reducing risk depending on the features, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, these are the goal is for you to have a lot of options to choose from, because these are going to change, right? What's the most important thing depends a lot on who it is you're talking to and what's going on in their business, right? So it'll change over time. If you work in cybersecurity, okay, the people you're talking to probably care most about mitigating risk, right? It seems logical, but that's the most important thing to them, right? But let's say you're talking to that CISO, right? And you've talked to them and you know that risk is a big thing for them. But then 2 weeks ago, they got bought by a private equity firm. And now this person who was the head honcho and knew the owners and everything like that is now part of a large PE conglomerate. That may have changed, right? Now it may be more about his reputation. It may be more about him being a hero in the organization and proving himself. It may be about saving money because now they're private equity and everybody's watching every dollar, right? So you can't just use the same ones over and over again. And you also can't assume that everybody thinks money's the most important thing, right? It's important to everybody, but it's very rarely the most important thing to everyone, right? And it always, and money being something that people value doesn't just mean they value a cheaper price, right? If you can help me increase my revenue or drive a higher profit margin or get a stronger ROI, those are all money values that have nothing to do with driving my cost down or lowering your price, right? So keep that in mind when you get into that.
We've got another great example from Melissa that I'll just throw out there real quick. Hey, Bob, this is Melissa with Validity. We've been helping others in your space with email marketing strategies, and I wanted to ask, what challenges have you faced with your email campaigns?
Okay.
I've got a feeling on this one.
What's your feeling, Alan?
My feeling is it's really good up until the question. And as somebody who does marketing, I can tell you that even if I had time to sit down and think about the challenges I've had with my email campaigns, it would take me some effort. Like it feels like a big burden to put on me right at the start of the call. Like, I'm going to make you come up with a list of your challenges. But I'm not really a bona fide salesperson like you, John. That's just my gut feel. What do you think?
The force is strong in you, Colin. You got this down. You should be teaching this one, right? That's exactly right. First of all, it's a fantastic question to ask. It's just the wrong time to ask it, right?
Yeah.
Because again, if we're cold prospecting Bob or Colin or whoever it is that's in that marketing director position, and they don't know me from Adam, and 7 seconds into the first time they've ever heard from me, I'm asking them what that's what they spend their entire day thinking about, their entire life thinking about, are these challenges that they have with their marketing campaigns. It's just too big of a question for me to answer right now. I still don't know who you are. I still don't know why we're having this conversation, and that's a really big question for me to try and answer. So we'll talk in a second about how we kind of lead into that, because we absolutely want to get to that conversation, but we need to make sure we're in a place that it's going to hit the mark, and you don't want to waste your best money question when the customer's still not listening to you, right? So that would be definitely the advice I would give you on that one. And I think that'll make a little more sense here in just a second when we talk about our Swift questions. So here's a couple of examples, right? You see option A and you see option B in here. So clearly I am not Lauren. I would be substituting in John here, but you can see the difference in the two of these, right? The first one sounds a little bit more like the example we just heard, right? Where it's, hi, Colin, this is John calling from Factor 8, and I'm calling to learn more about your company's training strategy. Is there anything really of value in there for Colin, right? I get a lot of value out about it because I'm going to learn all about your training strategy, and that's going to give me a good idea if I can sell you some stuff. But Colin's not going to walk away with anything because he already knows his training strategy, right? So that doesn't really help him sharing that information with me. On the flip side, if I flip it around to, hey, Colin, this is John calling from Factor 8, and I'm calling to see if Factor 8 can help you kick up your ROI on the training investment. Well, now there's something Colin cares about, right? We're going to help him get a better ROI. We're going to help him be able to justify his training investment to his higher ups to make sure they get the results that they need out of the training that they're investing in. Now, all of a sudden, we've got something that Colin may care about, and that's going to get his attention.
If I even know what the ROI is in the first place. I mean, what make my ears perk up at that is like, ooh, you can help me calculate ROI from training investments?
You can actually give me a number. I don't even care if it's if the number's going up or down. The fact that you can put a number on it, because it's already a step in the right direction, right?
Right.
So these Swift questions, right? So just to the example we just heard, we've been trained as salespeople. Every time you walk into any training or anytime you talk about selling effectively, it's always open-ended question, open-ended question, open-ended question. And if you throw out a closed-ended question, they take a ruler and whack it across your wrist, right? Because closed-ended questions are bad. Never ask closed-ended questions. And that's not true, right? They can serve a very specific purpose for us here in our introduction. If we can ask effective closed-ended questions that are no-brainers and are easy for the customer to answer, right? Because when we think about what we're trying to do in that introduction, it's to get them engaged, right? The most important thing is to get them engaged. And when you think about these no-brainer questions, right, if we take it out of a work context for a second, right, and I use Colin as an example here, and I say, Colin, are you married?
I am.
Where do you live?
Milford, Massachusetts.
You have any kids?
No.
See, he didn't have to stop what he was doing. He's still managing the Q&A. He's still playing Fortnite in the background, right? He's got all sorts of stuff going on. He didn't have to stop what he was doing to answer any of those questions because they're so quick and so easy to answer. Even if he was trying not to answer my questions, his mouth is going to spit out the answer before his brain can say, don't answer that question, because it's just too easy to answer, right? So we want to pull that into the work context for our clients, right? In my case, it might be, it might be something along the lines of, do you guys have an inside sales force, right? Because we do inside sales training. So yes, we do. How many reps do you have? 50. How many locations are they in? 2. Those sorts of things, right? They're very quick, very easy to answer questions. Closed-ended question does not mean yes or no. It can be a number. It's a 1 to 5 word answer, but it's something that doesn't rely on a whole lot of explanation or a whole lot of, they don't have to expound on it very much. It is what it is. Those are the kind of questions we want to ask. So the goal is we ask 2 or 3 of these to get the customer talking, get them engaged with us, and also kind of set the rhythm of the conversation, right? I'm going to ask you a question, you're going to give me an answer. I'm going to ask you a question, you're going to give me an answer. Now we hit them with the big question, right? We get them going a couple of times. Now they're paying attention. Now their head's in the right space. They're thinking along the right lines. they're ready to have this conversation. Now I ask them well, what are some of those key challenges you're having with your email marketing campaigns? Boom. Now I'm ready to answer it because we've already kind of established what the conversation is going to look like. And here we go. And now I'm ready to answer the question.
Yep. And you maybe before that, you asked me like, how many emails do you send to your list in a given week? Do you use segmenting? And are you controlling for time of day? Right. And you've got me thinking like, ooh, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But those are some of the like tactical things, easy for me to answer. Yes, no, 7 a week. And then what are some of my challenges? Now I've got those queued up in my head.
Yep, exactly right. Yeah, you don't use the sample questions I used with Colin the first time, right? Don't ask your prospects if they're married and where they live and how many kids they have, unless you're selling, school supplies to people or something like that. That would be relevant. These should, when you're doing it really well, these are also good qualifying questions to make sure, A, this is a good prospect, and B, you and I should even be having this conversation, right? Because if I know my top prospects, I sell, I'm in operations and I work with, facilities managers and operations managers, and they need to have at least 2 locations. So I say, how many locations do you guys have? And they say, this is the only one. Okay, good. I've also kind of disqualified you because maybe we shouldn't be having this conversation at all before I go too far down the rabbit hole. So, absolutely. So again, and this will be part of one of the cheat sheets we can send out to you later, right? But here's their name, here's your name, there's your Swift purpose, and there's the 1 to 3 questions that you're going to be asking in order to get that conversation going and get them rolling into a conversation. That's a very abbreviated version of the Swift intro, right? We've taken about a 2.5 hour training session and blocked it down into 21 minutes. So I think we did pretty good.
And they're getting it. Here's one from Nick Ross at Clue. He says, hey, John, this is Nick from Clue, a competitive intelligence workflow designed for PMMs like you. Curious if you're the one at your company handling competitive intel. So that's your first easy question answer. I assume there's a few more in there, Nick. That starts the conversation, and then you can open it up. We also got what I think is a good question. Should we ask these questions to decision makers only, or to whoever answers the phone first? So I guess maybe the implied question is there, does the Swift intro change depending on who I've reached?
Yeah, good question. I would say it would depend a little bit. It doesn't necessarily need to be the decision maker, but I'd probably only want to use it on somebody in the decision-making organization, right? I'm not going to use it on the receptionist who picks up the phone or the person at the front desk, right? I still want to engage that person, and there's a ton of good stuff I can learn from them. But it's not when I'm not going to go down the Swift intro path generally with that person, because they probably don't know the answers to the questions I'm trying to get, right?
Yep.
So yes, but if it's somebody, maybe I generally sell to the CFO, but this person is the head of accounts payable. Okay, well, that's somebody in the organization. We're barking up the right tree, and they may be the champion who gets me in front of the CFO. So absolutely, I can use that and use that introduction.
Awesome.
So the one quick thing I'll say before we move on, that example that you gave from Nick, really good example of a Swift question at the end. Be careful you don't use your value prop though. There was a value prop right there instead of a Swift statement in there. It was your value prop, right? It was a hey, we do the blah 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 blah. You've put the focus on yourself instead of putting the focus on the company. Be careful with that.
Good catch. So Nick, a competitive intelligence workflow designed for PMMs like you, maybe that can be re-angled a little bit so that the PMM kind of comes first as the subject of the sentence or something like that.
Exactly. Hey, the goal of my call was to help you, blah, 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 blah. When they say, oh, well, how are you going to do that? Or who are you? That, now when we have an opportunity to give our value prop, that's when we want to deliver. Because it's a good value prop. It's just not the right time to get it to them right in the middle of the call or start the call.
Thanks for throwing that out there, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are super brave. I love this. So now we're going to talk about voicemails. And it's always interesting when we talk to people about voicemails because there's a couple of things that always happen, right? One is I'll get people who say, well, we don't leave voicemails, or why bother leaving voicemails because nobody ever calls them back. A little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Obviously, they're not going to call you back if you don't leave a message. So that would stand to reason. And, the other part of that is it's usually an exaggeration, right? Because when we say nobody ever calls you back, it's not nobody ever calls you back. It means out of 100 voicemails, I may get 2 calls back, right? And that's such a low return. Why am I leaving these voicemails? Well, we'll talk a little bit about that and share some examples. But I would say if you're making the 100 calls anyway, it's not a lot of extra effort to leave that voicemail if you're doing it effectively, right? And even if you can really hone your skills and say you take that from 2 callbacks to 6 callbacks out of 100, it's still only a 6% callback. It's not fantastic, but it's 3 times as many conversations as you were going to get out of those voicemails before, right? And if you don't leave any voicemails, it's 6 more conversations than you were going to have, period, right? So it's all about those incremental gains and those incremental improvements. And you absolutely can change up your voicemails and use very specific approaches in your voicemail that will drive a stronger callback. Right, so let's talk about what some of those things are and what that looks like. Here we go. Right, so we're not trying to sell over voicemail, right? That's not the point. We're not pitching over voicemail. The only reason we're leaving a voicemail is to get a call back, right? Once we get the call back, now it's on us as the salesperson to make the most of that conversation. But the only purpose your voicemail serves is to get a call back. Here's some interesting data here, right? I'm sure a lot of you guys, if you've been in this space for a while, hear the scary statistics about the number of leads that never get called or people who only get called once, right? Here's the reason why you should be making or have your team make at least 6 attempts to get in front of your customer, right? Because the numbers show how much your odds increase as you continue to make those calls. They may not pick it up the first time. They may not call you back the first time. But by the time you get to that 5th or 6th time, that's when you start getting the callbacks. That's when you start getting the connection, right? Because your customers aren't stupid. And if they buy stuff for a living or they get calls from salespeople for a living, they know the stats just like you do. And they know that 92% of the salespeople won't call me back more than twice, right? So if I just ignore everybody as a rule, I can get rid of 9 out of 10 salespeople and only have to talk to the 1 or 2 who continue to reach out to me. Because odds are they have something really valuable to say or really believe their product can help me. I'm okay having a conversation with 1 or 2. I can't talk to 10 of you or 20 of you, right? So it's a really easy way to weed out the people who aren't that serious about helping me if I just blanketly ignore everybody and see who keeps coming back.
And to that point, people try to sell me stuff all the time. It is 99% of the time through email. And if anybody ever calls me, we will have a conversation. If they leave a voicemail, maybe it's a 50-50 shot, but just doing it in the first place is kind of a way to stand out, which is crazy. But I used to be in the camp, like I gave up on voicemail at one point. For those of you who don't know, I was in account management at a marketing agency for 6 years, a lot of talking to customers. And I would do the call. I thought a voicemail was a voicemail, leave a voicemail, rarely got calls back, and I just gave up. Nobody checks their work voicemail. The truth was I was leaving bad voicemails. So John, like the point you made about doing it right, it's about you have to do it. You have to do it a certain number of times. And then like you actually have to do a good job at it too.
Yep, absolutely. And this is another one of those where it's so important to practice this, right? There's no reason not to be prepared or able to deliver this because you can practice it on your own. You can call your office from your home. You can call the guy next to you and leave a voicemail and say, hey, I'm working on my voicemail. Can you give me some feedback tomorrow? Right? You can call your boss, your supervisor, like anybody you can leave this voicemail. It takes 15 seconds if you're doing it well. Practice it, be prepared, be ready to deliver it, right? And really, I want you to think about your voicemails in terms of 4 goals, right? The first and most obvious one is let's get a call back. Number 1. Number 2 is, though, it's also going to leave a positive brand impression. They may not ever call your voicemail back, but they may respond to an email the following day, right? And it may have been that was just the right number of impressions and leaving the voicemail and then hearing your name in the voicemail, seeing your name on their email, that's what triggered them to respond, right? So it's hard to know which straw was the one that broke the camel's back when you're having an 8 to 10 to 12 touch sequence that you're running with your prospects. If you don't leave those voicemails, you're leaving yourself short on all of those brand impressions and decreasing the odds that they're ever going to respond to email either. Leaves a positive rep impression, right? Again, it's a chance to stand out for yourself. I can tell you, I get sales calls all the time. My number rings all the time from people I don't know or numbers I don't recognize. It's probably 8 or 9 times out of 10 that they do not leave a message. Right? And again, I'm not going to blindly call you back if you don't even leave me a message, right? At least if you leave a message, there's a chance I'm going to listen to it and get something I like. The last one, this is the most fun, right? There's a little bit of guilt, right? At some point, if you continue to call and you continue to leave these messages and continue to reach out, some point people are going to pick up because they feel bad that you just continue to call, right? And again, I don't care why you picked up or why you called me back. Now it's on me. I've got my chance. I've got my opportunity to have that conversation with you, right? So if it produces a little guilt, you give me a call back because you feel bad that I keep calling out and you're just calling to tell me to stop calling. I'm okay with that. I've got a conversation right now. I've got my opportunity. So the voicemail boo-boos, there's some fun ones in here, right? So the ghost mail, that's the I don't even leave a voicemail, right? We've got the value prop building its ugly or showing its ugly head in here. The rambler, we'll listen to that one in just a second. Those are fun. We'll listen to a little bit of that one and talk about what a good voicemail is supposed to sound like. The speed demon's a really tricky one, right? And that, I think everybody knows what that means, right? It's you're talking like the auctioneer going 100 miles an hour. And the problem is you've left voicemails 50 times today and it starts to feel robotic and it starts to feel autopilot. And the trick is to make every one you leave during the day sound like it's the first one you've done, because it's the only one that customer is going to get, right? And it's very tricky to do that day in, day out, 50, 60 times a day. I get it, but that's what makes it stand out. If nothing else, make sure that your phone number, you pause, right? Everybody knows the phone number cadence, right? It's 334. Right? So area code, 3-digit prefix, and then the rest of your number. So take a pause between each of those and give the person a chance to actually catch your number, because that's the thing you need to be able to walk away from. So let me play for you an example of the Rambler. Again, unfortunately, this is an actual voicemail that was left for an actual customer. So let's hear what it sounds like. We may or may not listen to the entire thing because it's pretty painful.
Hi, good morning, Amanda. This is Brian. Currently right now, 9 a.m. thereabouts on this fine Wednesday morning. It's going to get hot today. With America, I just wanted to follow up on some information that we had left to be presented to you as a folder on our temporary staffing services. I hope you had maybe had a chance to review it a little bit. If there's any questions,
okay, I'm going to stop that right there. So just for the record, that was 27 seconds of his voicemail. It felt like about 5 minutes. The entire length of that voicemail runs 1 minute and 10 seconds, which when you say 1 minute and 10 seconds doesn't feel terrible, but when you listen to 1 minute and 10 seconds, it takes forever. And the funniest part about that particular voicemail is when you get all the way to the end of it, the last thing he says is, if I don't hear back from you, I'll shoot you an email tomorrow. Right? So he takes 1 minute and 10 seconds to leave this voicemail of all these rambling reasons why she might want to call him back. And then the last thing he says is, basically, don't worry about calling me back because I'm just going to email you anyway. He shoots himself in the foot. Right? So that's our Rambler buddy. Right? But this, again, we're not trying to sell over voicemail. This is not our time to sell products. That's not what the goal is. The goal is to get that call back. And so when you're thinking about what a good voicemail needs to sound like, it needs to be under 20 seconds. And that's not speeding it up so that it's under 20 seconds. It's cutting out the crap so that it's under 20 seconds and removing all the words you don't need in there.
Key distinction.
It needs to be concise, right? It needs to be easy to understand and also easy to read, right? Because how do most people get their voicemails now? It's voice-to-text transcription in their phone. They're not even listening to it, they're reading it. So if you're not speaking clearly and you're not speaking slowly, the little transcribe app is not going to get it right, and it's going to look like gibberish when the person reads it, and they're not going to take the time to try and figure out what you're meant to say. It's already hard enough to get a call back. Don't make it any harder than it needs. Slow down, speak clearly, use a smaller number of words to get your point across, right? Be upbeat, have some energy in your voice, leave them wanting more, right? Give them that reason to call back, and make sure that you've actually given them a call to action, right? Please give me a call back. Not if you have any questions, call me, or if you have some time, or when you feel like it, or give me a call back, right? That's what I expect you to do when you hear this voicemail, right? So when we look at what a good voicemail sounds like, there's a few different ways that we can approach this, right? The one on the far right looks very familiar from a few seconds ago. We can use that same swift statement that we used in our introduction in our voicemail as well, right? There's a couple of things I change on it. I'm obviously not going to ask them those questions at the end because nobody's there to respond. But I can use that same statement of, hey, the reason I was calling was to see if we could help you up your ROI on the training investment. That works just as well in a voicemail as it does in an introduction. I can translate it over very easily. We can use the lever, same way, right? Hey, I saw you attended our webinar last week. I wanted to follow up with you, see what questions you had, blah, 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 blah. The mystery one is one of my favorites. I like it just because a lot of people won't do it. But I'll tell you, so when I say mystery, it's as simple as, hey, this is John Healy, 480-459-0253, click. And I just gave out my actual cell phone number in there, so if anybody wants to blow up my phone, that was it. All right. So, but that's it. And every time we do this in training, I've done this with thousands of reps all over the world, right? And 80%, 70% of the room is going, I would never call that person back. I would never call that. Why does that would never work? Blah, blah, blah. That's so uncomfortable. I ask the question every time, who would call that back? Who wouldn't be able to resist the curiosity? 25 to 30% of the people every single time. Yep, Colin's one of them. They raise their hand. Because even though they just can't stop themselves, they have to know who that was and what it was, right? So I'm not saying that should be your default voicemail that you leave every single time. But I'm saying if you're at step 8 or 9 in your 12-step cadence and you're about to put them on the nurture list anyway, what have you got to lose, right? You throw that out there. 30% of the population would call you back on that, so you might as well throw it out there, right? And again, our only goal is to get a call back. That's the only reason we're leaving the message. So here's an example of another lever, right? If you're in more of an account management or working with an existing book of accounts, this would be an effective one, right? Hey, John with Factor 8, I've been working with your company the last 3 years. Need to chat with you briefly. Please give me a call at blah, 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 right? That's a good lever. You've done business with us in the past, and I'm calling about your account, right? Stand to reason. Very easy lever to use. I've got a good example in here too. Usually I just play bad examples and we all have a good laugh, but let's hear what good sounds like. And we'll, after I play this real quick, I'll ask you guys, if anybody in the audience can kind of chime in as far as what type of voicemail you think this one was, right? This is a good example.
Hi, Amanda. John Schneider, 3 o'clock on Monday. I wanted to touch base in regards to our career fair, which is coming up this Wednesday. It's over at the University of Phoenix Stadium. We actually still have a couple booth spaces available, so I thought I'd check in with you at the last minute and see if you may have some hiring needs that we could help you out with. If you can, hope you're having a great day. We'll talk soon.
So obviously
Bye-bye.
We redacted his phone number at the end, but anybody in the comments or want to raise their hand and take a stab at what type of voicemail they think that was?
Okay. We've got a couple people, Melissa Hitchcock and Sal Villardo, both say urgency.
They are correct. Melissa and Sal, you get bonus points. Nicely done. Yeah, right? You could hear it in there, right? He's talking about the career fair that's coming up on Wednesday. Wanted to call at the last minute to see if you still had needs, right? This is a time-sensitive thing. This is coming up on Wednesday. If you have a need, we can help you out. Very nicely done. Okay. I'm sorry, Colin, was there something else from the group on voicemails before we move on to engagement?
Yeah, I've got a couple, and these are pretty rapid fire questions, I think. One is, so are you leaving voicemails on every call in your sequence, or are you going to leave one, just leave a call, no voicemail every other? How do you split that out?
Yeah, so it depends on how you execute your cadence, right? So there are some people I know who will try calling in the morning, and if the person doesn't pick up, they'll call again in the afternoon. If you're doing something like that, don't leave it both times, right? So I typically say maybe twice a week leaving a message is probably about as far as I would go, right? If I'm trying to prospect out to somebody, right? So maybe I call them on Tuesday and I call them again on Friday, something like that. But if you're calling in between just to try and catch them, yeah, don't leave them 15 voicemails over the course of the week. You're going to be terrifying people and may end up on the wrong side of the police talking. So don't do that.
Okay, and then so here's another kind of a similar question, I guess, just in terms of execution on this. Is the idea that you would leave the same type of voicemail every time, or are you kind of changing it up? You might leave a lever, might leave an urgency, might leave a swift.
Yeah, good question. I would always switch it up when I'm able to, right? Because I want them to have some familiarity with me, but I don't want it to be the same voicemail they're getting every time. So for me, when I'm changing it up or when I'm running something like that, I will put in my notes, right? When I'm logging it in Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever, when I say leave a voicemail, it'll say urgency, and it's just date and time stamp. So I know next time which one I did, and so I don't leave the same voicemail the second time, right? Or depending, if my cadence is running like on a once a week type of a call or something like that, I can just say, hey, this week I'm leaving my calls around 11 because we did a webinar and I've got a bunch of people I'm calling about the webinar. And then next week I'm going with a swift statement around saving them money. And then the week, and run it that way. The other thing I'll tell you when it comes to voicemails is actually do some A/B testing on this and figure out what the most effective one is for you, right? Try one for 2 weeks, right? At that point, you probably leave about 250 voicemails during the course of that 2-week stretch and track how many callbacks you got. And then for the next 2 weeks, try a different one. Track how many callbacks you got. Whichever one's more effective, keep doing that. There's not one that's better than the others necessarily. Just do whichever one's most effective for you and let the numbers kind of tell you which one that is.
I was waiting for you to suggest A/B testing, because I'm a wholehearted believer that there is only one best practice, and that is to test.
Mm-hmm.
There are some really good pieces of advice, and there are worse pieces of advice. I think these scripts and ideas that you're giving are great, like great starting point, much better than a lot of what I used to do. But definitely everybody listening, like just keep a simple spreadsheet. And if you can chunk out your time like week by week and keep track of your callbacks, it'll be so easy for you to know which one was more effective for your audience and for your product.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and that's the advice I give everyone whenever we go through any trainings, right? I never give anybody scripts. I don't like scripts. I'm not a fan of scripts. I like samples. I like examples. I like starters and things that'll get you going until you know what sounds right. But try it. Feel what feels natural. Don't do what I said because it's not going to feel right to you, right? We're not the same person. Do what feels best. And again, if one works for you, keep doing it. And if your neighbor next to you says that's the worst voicemail ever and they do this one over here, I don't care. This one works for you, so keep doing that one. It's much more important that you're successful than you do the thing I told you
to do at the end of the day. Bang on. So we've got 8 minutes, and I want to make sure that you tell us how to engage with prospects. So if you have a really burning question, you can ask it, people, but we're probably going to just try to get through the rest of what John has to offer for us today.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about customer engagement, right, I mean, this is actually a really good segue in, right? Because when we talk about scripts and when we talk about having to follow these very scripted call flows, that's what's going to drive engagement way down, right? Because we're so concerned about following the script and asking these 15 questions and making sure we've covered all of these things that we forget to have a conversation with the person that we're talking to, right? And so much of it is the basics of active listening and asking questions, and being prepared with follow-ups to actually engage them in there. So this is where scripts are really going to backfire on us. If you guys, anybody's a fan of Seth Godin, if you've read Tribes or Lynchpin or any of his books, right? This is one of his, as you can tell by his picture and the way he presents himself, he's not one to be to not let his freak flag fly, right? And this is the first step towards becoming extraordinary is, of course, to stop being ordinary, right? And that's what we've got to think about. How do we differentiate ourselves from all of the other people calling? The good news is, especially for the folks who are attending webinars like this and investing time in your own development, is you've already got a leg up, right? The fact that you care about doing better and the fact that you're actively trying to get better is going to separate you from 85% of the garbage that's going on out there with your competitors and with some of your peers, unfortunately, right? Because most people don't even put in the effort. That's going to help you stand out. And then we're going to talk about some other ways that we can help continue to get you moving in the right direction, right? This is what we want. We want raving fans here. We want engagement. We want people excited for these conversations. So especially when I'm talking to, whoa, that went really fast. I don't know why that screen popped away from me. Let me try this one more time. So especially when we're talking to SDRs, right? I always say that the goal is not to get the meeting, right? The goal is to get the customer engaged, and the result of that engagement is going to be the meeting, right? So really focus on that being the goal for your call, because that's going to lead to higher quality meetings when they come through, and it's going to lead to more meetings, right? If you're having an actual conversation and you get them engaged into a conversation versus just checking off 3 boxes and then booking a demo for next Thursday, right? That's not the type of pipeline that we want to be building. It's not to build, just jam numbers in at the top. It's be a qualified opportunity at the bottom, and engagement is what's going to help. Right. This is how we measure engagement from a Factor 8 perspective. We talk about these different levels, right? So you got these level 1, 2, 3, and 4 type engagements. And I've got a couple of sample calls in here. And this might be a good chance too, if we can get some feedback from the audience as we're playing this call. I don't think we're gonna have a chance to play both of them, but let's just play the first call. And I want to get a feel from the audience as far as where you feel this falls, right? If we're on a scale of 1 to 4 here on an engagement perspective, where would you rate this call and this rep's ability to engage their prospects? Let's listen to this.
Hey, Greg, this is Evan calling from. We were communicating via email, and you had mentioned that you might have some interest in connecting with Kyle in January, and I just wanted to reach out and see if you had any availability. You've met with Kyle in the past, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I have your role as the senior facility supervisor. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So are you involved with the fiber optic cabling and network infrastructure?
Yeah, I actually own it for this building.
Okay. Do you guys have any plans to go through any network infrastructure upgrades?
There is a plan for us to eventually go to 10 gig. When that is, I have no idea.
So let's stop there. So who has? If we can open up somebody's line here and have a little conversation around this. This would be awesome.
So I saw Michael Karpus. You raised your hand. I don't see you now, but if you anybody want to raise their hand, tell us what you think of that call. All right, Melissa. You can go ahead and unmute yourself, Melissa. There you go.
Hey there.
Hey.
I thought the call was good because she referred back to somebody else that they had talked with and their previous communication. So my take on it was that it was a good call, and she started asking questions to get him talking. Maybe not open-ended questions, but questions.
Yeah. So Melissa, if you were to say on a scale of, kind of that level 1 up to a level 4, right? Where would you rate that as far as her ability to engage him?
I would say 3 to 4. He didn't sound overly excited to talk to her, but he was talking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you made a couple of good catches in there. So thanks, Melissa. I appreciate you jumping on, and you caught a lot of good stuff in there. So you're right. She did a couple of good elements from the intro that we talked about, right? She used a lever, right? I think you'd worked with so-and-so in the past and yada, yada, and you had requested this meeting, good lever. Had a couple of good swift questions to get him engaged and get him going. The thing you hit on, Melissa, that was so important is she never really made that transition from the short, quick questions to get him engaged to an open-ended question to dig deeper and really get him leaning into the conversation. A little bit with that last question, which is why, for me, it started off at about a 2. I think she pushed him up to maybe a 2.5 or a 3 with that last question. But she also had a really big miss in there, right? Which is her not actively listening and going through her list of questions, which was, she asked if he was involved in the cabling and infrastructure, something along those lines. And he said, well, yeah, I actually own it for this location. Right. So for me, as I'm listening to that, I've got alarm bells going off all over the place. I'm going, okay, he owns it. That's important. Let's dig into that. And he specifically said for this location. So let's dig into that. How many locations? Who are his peers? Should we be talking to those people as well? Right. But she's not listening to his answer because she's so concerned about asking her next question that she forgot to listen. Right. Those would have been great opportunities to engage. And that's where, and Kellen, I know I'm making you nervous here because we're up against the clock. So let me give a couple of quick pointers on this topic. When you're in that situation and you get that good juicy info, how do you take it to that next level? This is where you have those key phrases to dig a little bit deeper, right? So that's things like, can you share with me a little bit more about that? Can you explain to me a little bit more about the organization? Can you tell me more? Can you paint me a picture? Can you give me an example? Those sorts of things, really good opportunities at that level. That's where you're going to get the engagement, right? So when somebody says, yeah, I actually own that for this location. Wow, that sounds like a really big responsibility. Can you share with me a little bit more about what sort of projects you get involved in, right? Now we get him a chance to talk a little bit, and he's going to open up a bit. That's what we're after. So some of those little starter phrases can be really important. As we're getting towards the end here, this is the last thing I wanted to share with you guys. These are the cheat sheets that Colin mentioned at the beginning that we're happy to share with you. These are things that we provide during our training, whether it's around driving engagement, whether it's around delivering an introduction, or whether it's leaving example voicemails, and we'll share those with you as well so you have some starting points. If you email Jeremy at Factor 8, he's one of my point person on the sales side, just put cheat sheets in the subject field. He'll know what you want, and he'll get these over to you in soft copy so that you can take them, you can start putting it into practice right away, and that you can start perfecting some of these skills that are going to help you drive pipeline.
This is awesome. This was so packed. We might have to do a follow-up and get deeper into some of these. Thank you to everybody who participated. Y'all were brave, and you had some really smart comments and questions. Really hope you're leaving with like some things that you can test and try, some jumping off points like John said. Don't necessarily treat these as scripts, but you've got a framework now to test your intros, your voicemails, and things that you can use then once you have the person on a hook to open up the conversation and really get them engaged with you. So thanks again for coming, John. I really appreciate it. That was so amazing.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Colin.
And everybody, we do 2 webinars a week, so I hope I'll see you on another one soon. Take care, everybody.